is rural. We have more open space than we know what to do with. So why is it such a threat? But this isn't only one side of the equation. Let's take a little closer look. Only about 2.6% of the American landscape is urban, with more than 1,000 people per square mile. And about 4.4 is developed, rural developed. And most people don't realize that 77% of the American population lives in that 2.6% of the American landscape. It's astonishing. It's no wonder these people can be brainwashed through propaganda in thinking that the whole country is being overtaken by development, because that's what they see going all around them. They don't have a clue as to what's going on in rural America. They could drive through it, but it just doesn't make a connection because they have to live in these urban landscapes. Now let's take a little bit closer look. In Portland, Oregon, and the state of Oregon in the late 1970s was the first state to implement what we now call smart growth. They believed that their state was being taken over by Californians, migrating up after retiring and so forth. And yet the city of Portland is less than 0.5% of the entire state of Oregon. But they felt that they must pass regulations to establish an urban growth boundary. And therefore, everything that's within this urban growth boundary is controlled by the city and ultimately state law. This is where all growth and development can occur, and everything outside of this urban growth boundary should stay open space. Now, if you happen to be inside the boundary when all this occurred, even though you were farming happily, all of a sudden your taxes skyrocketed and you were forced into selling because the planners want your farm to be a high-density community. This is what the plan calls for. And so, as a result, that area is developed into high-density apartments. They're attractive, and some people like to live there. What was land that was worth $600 or $700 or $800 an acre is now worth $100,000 to $200,000 an acre, and whoever sells that land to the developer becomes a millionaire. When if you turn 180 degrees across this urban boundary, that landowner cannot develop their land whatsoever. Their land today is still worth $1,000 an acre. They get no benefit from the economic advantage that their neighbors across the highway got. And so smart growth discriminates against some while creating an advantage for others. And where that line falls on the map makes all the difference in the world, which makes it then open to corruption. The whole system of smart growth is a system designed to be corrupt. Even within certain areas are rezoned from single-family units to multifamily units. So that you now have, if you ever go into the city council or the planning department to get a permit to renovate your house, your single-family house, all of a sudden you find that you're out of compliance. You cannot renovate it. You can continue just to let it deteriorate, but you cannot do anything because now it's zoned for multifamily, high-density multifamily. And as a result, if you want to do anything, you have to tear down your house and build apartment complexes. Now, looking at the income and housing costs for Portland is a striking comparison. The adjusted real income has maintained a fairly flat status through the period of the 1980s, 1990s, as you would expect it would. But look what happens to housing costs. These are adjusted. They have gone up strikingly. Is this because the property has become more valuable? Well, yes, because if you only have an X amount to develop, that what's left is going to remain or become extremely valuable. Is this true across the country? Let's take a look at what the value of a quarter-acre lot truly is in cities like Kansas City, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Houston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, that have still minimum zoning requirements. They're there. They actually provide a benefit to the community. Your average increase in your lot price is somewhere between $0 and $30,000. That's the cost of regulation in those cities. As soon as you begin to zone for smart growth, this is what happens. Your costs skyrocket. In the case of New York City, San Francisco, it has gone up to $600,000 for a quarter-acre lot that is due solely and only to zoning and smart growth. This is above the average real value of property in the area. This is the true cost of smart growth. And you begin to wonder why all of a sudden your taxes are skyrocketing. Open space is one of the mantras, a holy mantra for smart growth. How do you control the development outside of the growth boundary areas? Well, the newest trick that was created in 1992 is conservation easements. Conservation easements are sold on the bill of goods that they have immediate income from the sale of the easement, that the state exempts you from a income tax on that sale or sales tax on that sale, reduces future property taxes, are supposed to, it really doesn't, protects from future undesirable growth or development, and current use usually is allowed. So if you're farming, you're allowed to continue to farm. If you have a forest and a woodlot and you're harvesting timber, you're allowed to do that. So the current use is allowed. Everything else is excluded. And many, many farmers, because of the increased regulations and the cost of doing business, are jumping on this conservation easement bandwagon to get a few dollars in their pocket today. What they don't realize, protects former owners from any new regulations or penalties. That's usually often thrown in there as well. But what it really happens in these conservation easements won't be known for probably 10 or 15 years by the landowner. Realize that in almost every conservation easement that they're not a true easement. In a true easement, the owner allows certain other uses to be applied, putting a pipeline through or a transmission line or something like that. The property rights still belong to him or her. In a conservation easement, the reverse is true. The owner conveys their rights to the new holder of the conservation easement. Only those rights that are specified by the easement remain within the landowner. So it's a reverse easement situation. All of a sudden, you basically have lost the bundle of property rights that you once had, and now these property rights belong to the easement holder, except for the few, those specifically given to the previous owner by the new holder. And they're very usually narrow in scope. And the new easement holder holds all the other private property rights. Any use not specified in the easement is gone forever. They're gone in perpetuity to your life, to your kids' life, to future generations. They're being held up and tied up by the conservation holder, which is usually the government or one of the NGOs like the Nature Conservancy and so forth. The easements usually allow the holder to define the best management practices. But what does that mean? For instance, a clause harvesting is allowed using best management practices allows the holder to